My name is Elena Moore, and for the longest time I thought I had the perfect life. A husband who adored me, a daughter who filled our home with laughter, and a family business that tied us all together like threads in a warm quilt. But the truth? That quilt was already fraying, and behind every perfect picture, there's usually a shadow no one talks about. I grew up in a small town outside of Chicago. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. My father, Robert, ran a modest carpentry shop, and my mother, Diana, was the heart of our home, gentle, patient, the kind of woman who could turn an empty room into a sanctuary. From them, I learned two things: the value of hard work and the danger of blind trust. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. When I was 22, I met Daniel Carter. He was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, funny, ambitious. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting just for him to arrive. I was cautious at first. Something about him felt too polished, but he knew exactly how to lower my guard. "Don't look at me like that," he once told me during our second date, leaning across the table with that mischievous smile. "Like I'm a puzzle you'll never solve." "I promise I'm simple. Just a man who wants a good woman and a family." I believed him. Daniel and I got married 2 years later. The wedding wasn't lavish, but it was filled with people who loved us, or at least, loved the image of us. My best friend, Melissa, was my maid of honor. She squeezed my hand right before I walked down the aisle and whispered, "Don't second-guess it. He looks at you like you hung the stars." And for a while, it did feel like I had hung the stars. Daniel and I built a life together. He got a job in a finance firm downtown, and I started working with my father, learning the ropes of the carpentry business. We bought a modest house, nothing fancy, but filled it with warmth. A year later, our daughter Sophie was born. If you've ever held a baby in your arms, you know the world shifts. Suddenly, everything is sharper. Every sound, every shadow, every promise you've ever made, it all matters more. Daniel was a doting father at first. Midnight feedings, diaper changes, rocking her to sleep. He wasn't perfect. He had his moods, his nights of coming home late, but I brushed it off as stress. After all, providing for a family isn't easy. But here's the thing about cracks. They start small. The first time I noticed, it was subtle. Daniel came home late, smelling faintly of perfume. Not mine. When I asked, he laughed it off. "Babe, I was at a client dinner." You know how those women spray themselves with a gallon of it before they leave the house? I wanted to believe him, so I did. Then there were the phone calls he'd take outside, the sudden business trips, the way he'd go quiet when I walked into the room while he was on his laptop. Again, I told myself I was being paranoid. Because here's the ugly truth. When you love someone, you'll build 1,000 excuses just to avoid tearing down the picture you painted of them. But the storm didn't really start until one night years later, when Sophie was 9 years old. We were having dinner, just the three of us. Sophie was telling us about her school project, her eyes wide with excitement, hands flailing as she explained how she and her best friend were building a volcano. Daniel was nodding along, but his phone kept buzzing on the table, over and over again. I remember the way Sophie's voice trailed off. She noticed it too. "Daddy, who keeps calling?" she asked. And for just a second, I saw something in his eyes. Guilt. Fear. Something that didn't belong at a family dinner table. He snatched the phone, silenced it, and forced a smile. "Just work, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But I worried. Oh, I worried. Because deep down, I knew the rain wasn't just tapping at the windows anymore. The storm was already inside our home. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I found myself staring at Daniel's phone on the nightstand. It felt like Pandora's box, daring me to open it. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, and I whispered to myself, "Don't do it. Don't look." Because once you do, there's no going back. But curiosity has claws. And when I finally reached for that phone, I had no idea it would rip my entire life apart. That night, I told myself I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to snoop, wasn't going to be that wife. But Daniel's phone just sat there, glowing faintly on the nightstand like it had a pulse of its own. One buzz. Two buzzes. Three. Finally, I whispered, "If there's nothing to hide, then I'll see nothing." My fingers were shaking as I picked it up. No password. That was the first red flag. Daniel always kept a lock on his phone. But tonight, it was open. Almost like fate wanted me to see. I scrolled through his texts. Most of it looked normal. Work stuff, group chats with his college buddies. And then I saw it. A name I didn't recognize. Scarlett Redheart. My stomach twisted. Who the hell was Scarlett? I tapped the thread. And there it was. Message after message that knocked the air out of me like punches to the gut. Scarlett, I can still smell you on me. When can we meet again? Daniel, soon. She suspects nothing. Scarlett, you always say that. I want more than stolen nights. Daniel, patience, baby. I told you. I'll handle it. My vision blurred. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Handle it? Handle what? Our marriage? Our family? As if the words weren't enough, the pictures came next. Scarlett, red lipstick, silky dresses, hotel rooms in the background. Her face smiling into the camera, his arm wrapped around her waist in more than one. I felt like the floor gave out beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. And then Sophie's laugh echoed in my head, the memory of just an hour ago, her talking about her volcano project. And him, smiling like everything was normal, while his phone kept buzzing with her. That's when something inside me snapped. I wish I could tell you I confronted him right then and there, screamed at him, threw the phone in his face. But I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I kept reading. I wanted to know everything. Their messages went back months. Little business trips were actually nights at hotels. Late client dinners? Private rendezvous. And the worst part? Scarlett wasn't just some fling. She was a colleague at his firm. Someone he saw every single day. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the sheer audacity. Every night he kissed me goodnight. Every time he promised Sophie he'd be there for her school plays, he was already living a double life. The next morning, I stared at him across the breakfast table. He was buttering toast, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. Sophie was chattering about her day, and I just watched him. Every smile, every word felt like poison. Babe, you okay? He asked, glancing up at me. I forced a smile. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. And that was when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Because I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to keep digging his own grave without knowing I was watching. Over the next few weeks, I became an actress. Smiling, nodding, playing the role of the devoted wife while secretly collecting evidence. Every time Daniel worked late, I checked his location. Every credit card bill, every receipt I combed through. And every single time, Scarlett's name appeared like a stain that wouldn't wash out. There was one night I'll never forget. Sophie had gone to bed, and Daniel said he had a conference call. He stepped outside with his laptop. I followed quietly, standing in the hallway, and heard his voice drop into a whisper. Yeah, baby. I miss you too. Just a few more weeks and things will be different. I promise. Different. Different how? Was he planning to leave me? Leave Sophie? Start a new life with Scarlett? That's when my grief turned into rage. I finally broke down and told my best friend, Melissa. We sat in her living room, wine glasses untouched between us. I showed her the screenshots, the pictures. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. Elena, you have to confront him. You can't just. No, I interrupted. If I confront him now, he'll lie. He'll twist it. And worse? He might just leave and walk into the sunset with her. No, I'm not giving him that satisfaction. Melissa hesitated, then whispered, So what are you going to do? I looked at her, and for the first time, I let the anger show in my voice. I'm going to make him regret ever underestimating me. The breaking point came on Sophie's 10th birthday. We threw a small party at home, balloons, cake, her friends from school. Daniel was supposed to pick up the cake from the bakery. He was late. An hour late. When he finally walked in, he was flustered, tie loose, hair a mess. And there, tucked into his jacket pocket, was a hotel room keycard. I saw it. He didn't notice. That was the moment I stopped being a wife holding on to hope. That was the moment I became something else. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat alone in the living room, the key card clutched in my hand. I stared at it, my mind spinning with possibilities. This wasn't just proof. This was opportunity. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered to myself, "You wanted to play games, Daniel? Fine. Let's play." But this time, I wasn't going to lose. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I thought it would be a moment, a thunderclap, and then I'd recover, shredded but standing. Instead, betrayal is a slow, precise instrument. It picks at you. It fishes for weaknesses. It rearranges your world into something unrecognizable. For days after Sophie's birthday, I lived in a state of suspended motion. I went through the motions of marriage, smiles at breakfast, jokes in the morning, kisses goodnight. But inside, I was a machine sharpening itself for what came next. "You look tired," Daniel said one morning, worry in his voice. He still didn't know what I knew. He still pressed his mouth to mine like everything was normal. "How do you kiss someone after you know they've been lying?" My lips moved mechanically, while my life rewired. I stopped sleeping. I stopped trusting the ordinary rhythms. I watched Daniel like a detective watches a suspect. I cataloged his lies, his alibis, the places he claimed to be. I learned the cadence of his deceit. At first, my plan was simple: collect everything. Proof. Receipts. Pictures. Word trails. I wasn't going to hand him my heartbreak and let him walk through it untouched. I wanted evidence so undeniable it would make him understand, in a way words never could, that his choices would have consequences. But as the initial fury cooled into a cold, careful blaze, I realized proof alone wouldn't be enough. Proof humbles you, but revenge? Revenge requires theater. It requires a stage, an audience, and a performance so thorough it rewrites the record. "So what's the plan?" Melissa asked over coffee, tapping her finger on the rim of her mug like an impatient metronome. We'd made a pact 2 nights earlier. She would be my counsel and my conscience. She brought both, but mostly she brought the one thing I needed, a steady mirror for my rage. I laid the hotel key card on the table like a relic. "First, we map the pattern," I said. "Where does he go? Who is Scarlett? What does she want from him that I don't already give?" I can still hear the ugly humor in my own voice, as if I were solving a puzzle, not excavating a marriage. Melissa frowned. "You can't do this alone. You need a lawyer." "No," I said. "Not yet. If I bring in law now, it'll put a stop to things I want to see through. Lawsuits freeze things. Confrontation cuts off the story. I want him to keep moving. I want to see how bold he gets." She stared at me like I'd put a naked wire across the table. "Elena, you're talking like a plot." "Because this is a plot," I replied. "And I'm the author." We began small. I created a spreadsheet. The ridiculousness of it made me almost laugh. Dates, times, receipts, locations. I hacked into a few of Daniel's old cloud backups I'd accidentally synced to my tablet years ago. I checked past emails. I called the pharmacy where he sometimes filled prescriptions because I wanted patterns. The man at the counter assumed I was confirming a refill for my husband and gave me a timestamp. I found hotel bookings under a pseudonym he'd made once for a client. Every tiny lie was a breadcrumb. But the more I found, the more complicated the picture became. Scarlett wasn't just a coworker. She was younger than him by a decade, newly divorced, charismatic in a public way and slick in private messages. She had a past that shimmered with vulnerability whenever she typed it. And Daniel? He was attached to the idea of her, not just lust. I found messages where he wrote, "You make me feel alive again." I found messages where she wrote, "I'm not ready to be anyone's second." I didn't want to admit how that hurt. The old Daniel, the man who once told me he wanted a good woman and a family, had traded that language for something sharper. I thought I had married a man who could be content. Instead, he'd been building an appetite in secret. Patience became its own art. I waited for missteps. People always misstep when they're trying to be clever. He was no sociopath. He was sloppy with the arrogance of someone who thought he'd never be caught. Then he slipped. He left his laptop on the couch one Sunday afternoon like a gift. It was unlocked when I peered at it. The adrenaline, the old curiosity surged. There it was, a draft email to Scarlett, unsent. Daniel, I booked the lake house for next weekend. Tell me you want it. Tell me you hate her as much as I do. Hate. The word landed in me like a splinter. Lies mutate into cruelty when repeated. I began to catalog Daniel's coldness. There were nights I found receipts for expensive dinners. There were times I'd get a call from someone asking to speak to Dan about an account, and I'd watch a man I loved split his face into the polite, charming mask that erased the husband at home. He'd returned from the same trip smelling of perfume and coffee and newness, carrying with him a conspiratorial smile. There were nights I wanted to set the house on fire. Not literally. Metaphorically, burn the past until it was ash. Instead, I turned to the only thing I'd ever felt I could control. You're playing dangerous games, Melissa said one night when I told her more than perhaps I should have. She paced the small kitchen, nails clicking across her phone. What if he finds out you've been snooping? What if he flips it? What if he leaves? I finished for her. The idea struck me like cold water. Then I make sure what he leaves with is what he deserves. Melissa's mouth thinned. You're speaking like a woman possessed. Maybe I am. I looked at her, really looked. Fong marks of fury softened into something that could pass for sorrow. But I'm not going to let his betrayal be the story that ends me. Revenge planning, I discovered, has many faces. At the most base level, it is retaliation. Get even, expose, hurt back. At a higher level, it is reclamation. Take back the narrative, restore dignity, teach a lesson that lingers. I wanted both. I sketched out options on paper like a surgeon planning incisions. Option A, exposure. Make public what he hid. Send screenshots to his firm. Text Scarlett's husband if she had one. Put evidence in front of him when friends and family were present. Humiliate, withdraw. Watch the social scaffolding crumble. Option B, financial. Show him the ruin of betrayal. Discover where assets were, how much he had in accounts, whether joint credit could be leveraged. Cut off access. Show him the cold calculus of loss. Option C, emotional theater. Create a scenario where he would finally feel the hollow of being deceived. The aim wasn't simple cruelty, it was poetic justice. Make him crave what he destroyed. Option D, total erasure. Leave before he ever knew. Walk away with Sophie and the life we built. Vanish like a ghost. Take the moral high road and wreck him with the absence of my presence. Each option had merits. Each had costs. I could feel my old life dangling like jewelry on a string. One tug and everything would tumble. I thought of Sophie and the way her small fingers curled around mine. I thought of my parents, of lessons about hard work and dignity. I couldn't endanger Sophie. Nothing about my plan could ever risk her future. That boundary anchored me. I ruled out financial ruin. It felt ugly and potentially reckless. The law would be messy. I ruled out disappearing. It sounded noble, but it also sounded like surrender. What I wanted was to make him understand the failure of his choices in the most intimate way possible, by turning his own tools of deceit against him. So I stitched together a hybrid, slow, public exposure paired with theater. I would use his arrogance, his willingness to believe he was untouchable, against him. I would expose him at scale, but with control. I would make him see the spectacle of his fall. Nothing anonymous. Nothing messy. A clear moral. First, I needed allies. Melissa was the first. The second came from an unlikely place. You said you needed proof, my father said one Saturday when I visited his shop under the pretense of helping inventory. His hands were rough and the smell of sawdust clung to his jacket like a memory. He'd noticed the strain in my voice. I hadn't told him everything. I'd told him a fraction. Enough to make him listen. Dad, I'm not trying to tear the family apart, I said, worrying that my careful plan might look like collusion. He put down a chisel and looked at me like he always did when I tried to argue life into math. You're not alone, he said simply. You never were. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He offered instead the one thing I had forgotten existed, time-tested cunning. He'd seen men like Daniel in the shop, shiny, persuasive, always in a hurry to build an image. He knew the economics of pride. 2 things, he said. 1, patience. Second, make it visible to those who matter. Not just letters and pictures, to people who trust him, who write the checks, who shake his hand and think he's a stand-up guy. His voice grew quiet. Public humiliation isn't petty. It's truth. I promised him I'd be careful. He called the family lawyer not to sue, but to ask hypothetically about what could be done to ensure the protection of Sophie in the case of divorce or separation. The lawyer's questions were clinical, efficient. It felt like I was arming myself with the language of power. We built a timeline. We picked targets, the partner at Daniel's firm who'd been his mentor, the small group of friends who'd been part of our social circle, the PDA president who often gave him a stage at school. We mapped out when he would be most vulnerable, promotion season at the firm, an upcoming gala where his name would be mentioned. And we planned the centerpiece, a night at the league's annual charity gala where Daniel's firm was to be honored. He'd be on stage, smiling, lauded, applauded. That was the stage I wanted to use. Not because I craved cruelty, but because public applause is the currency men like him traded in. To watch that applause wither would be restorative. But what about Scarlett? Melissa asked later, tapping her pen against the calendar where I'd circled the gala in red. Does she even know he's married? Is she complicit? Is she dangerous? I didn't know. But I had a strategy for that too. I'd make sure Scarlett's role would be visible. I would not attack her blindly, but I would ensure she understood the stakes. Co-conspirators are less fun than scapegoats, but consequences fall on everyone who participates. On sleepless nights, I rehearsed how to watch him. I imagined the expression on his face when the first man who'd congratulated him would pause, then glance down at a phone and read, not corporate praise, but evidence. I pictured the slow comprehension forming like frost. And while I sharpened that image, I also made myself practical. I changed the locks to our home on a back channel so he wouldn't suspect. Not to lock him out, yet, but so he would come to find small inconveniences that erode confidence. I wrote a buffer of alternative explanations in case anyone asked. I rewired the narrative in my head until it sounded like a plan and not a spiral. There were moments I almost lost it. I stared at the photographs and wanted to burn them. I wanted to confront Scarlett in a parking lot and hear her cry. Instead, I let the anger be a tool. I stopped crying in front of Sophie. I learned to be wry in public and volcanic in private. I polished my voice until it held the calm of a woman who had already chosen. The day we mailed the anonymous package to Daniel's mentor, a small stack of carefully annotated screenshots and hotel receipts, I felt like a surgeon after the incision. It was ugly. It felt necessary. As the postmarked envelope slipped into the slot, I felt the first true rush of what I'd call control. Once it starts, Melissa warned me, you can't walk it back. I know, I said. The truth felt smaller than I imagined. When you act with purpose, consequences lose their terror and become currency. I was trading in them now. That night, I lay awake and thought of Sophie's face when she asked why Daddy was crying on the news. I thought of how I would explain the truth without shattering her. I thought of leaving the world that had pretended to be safe and stepping into one where I was the only architect. The plan was in motion. The web we'd woven would not snap quietly. It would snap combustibly. But even as I plotted and poised, a small, stubborn voice in the back of my head whispered one hope I hadn't admitted to anyone, that maybe, somewhere along the way, Daniel would understand why his choices had been monstrous. That understanding, even if it came as humiliation, might teach him to be the kind of man who wouldn't hurt a child or a future wife. It was wishful, naive, and probably sentimental. Revenge rarely reforms. It rearranges. Still, the idea lodged in me like a thorn. The plan to use the gala as crucible grew brighter. And as I whispered the dates to Melissa and my father, as we watched the calendar inch closer, something I hadn't expected settled over me. A cold, steely relief. The worst was over. I'd taken the chaos and made it purposeful. We finalized the plan. We created the evidence trail and set a stage cleaning for the perfect crumble. The gala was 3 weeks away. Every day Daniel grew more careless, more confident that he could balance lives. And every step he took made the noose around his bravado tighter. I told myself I'd be merciful. I told myself revenge would be surgical, not lethal. But there are plans you write and plans the heart writes for you, and the heart is a bad author for restraint. At 2 a.m. the night before the gala, I opened the envelope I'd made for Daniel. Not the one the world would receive, but the one I kept for myself. Inside was the hotel key card, a photograph of Scarlett leaning into him, and a single line I wrote in my own bloodless hand. I placed it on the kitchen table, put my hands around a mug of cold coffee, and waited for tomorrow to begin. The night of the gala arrived like a scene from the life I'd been rehearsing in shadow. My dress felt heavier than it should have, not because of the fabric, but because of everything pinned underneath: proof, plans, promises. I had gone to the hairdresser, smoothed my voice until it was steady, and practiced the mild, pleasant smile women wear when they don't know how to perform the ricochet of rage underneath. Sophie would be safe that night at Melissa's house. My father would sit on the couch at home with a book. Everything was compartmentalized. I told myself this a dozen times until it felt like the truth. "Are you nervous?" Melissa asked as she straightened the collar of my jacket in the cloakroom. Her voice was small and steady, like someone trying to will courage into being. "A little," I lied. "Mostly excited." She squeezed my hand. "Remember, once the curtain lifts, you can't pull it back." "I know." But my hand around the small envelope hidden in my clutch tightened anyway. Inside it were the documents I'd sent earlier to Daniel's mentor, the email I'd forwarded to the partner on the firm's board, copies of messages, and a note that said, simply, "You deserve to know who you're celebrating." I still felt a prickle of something like guilt. Then I thought of Sophie singing as she arranged candles on her cake, and the guilt evaporated. The room smelled of perfume and expensive cologne. People laughed, made polite talk, handed out business cards like prayer beads. Daniel came in like the polished creature I'd loved, jacket angled perfectly, smile ready for a camera. He greeted people, made jokes that got quick applause. There was a man at the head table, Daniel's mentor, who had practically fathered his career. The mentor shook Daniel's hand with a warmth that felt fragile to me, because warmth can be so easily exploited. We sat at a table near the front. My heartbeat had a tempo like a drumline. I could see him from where I sat, laughing, throwing his head back, the easy predator. I watched for the small tells I knew now, the way his eyes flicked to his phone, the way his smile tightened when he told a story that included me and Sophie. Everyone sees the public Daniel, never the private one. When the MC called Daniel to the stage to accept an award, I felt the world compress to the size of my throat. The audience rose to applaud. My plan was surgical, slow, deliberate, and public. The first move was subtle. Right before the mentor took the podium to give a short speech about integrity and a lifetime of values, his secretary handed him an envelope. He paused, puzzled. The envelope was thick, the paper unremarkable. But he opened it on camera. Inside was a single printed page with my name in the corner, and a line I'd written at 2 a.m. after I could no longer bear the silence. Truth matters more than applause. Under that was a list of attached proof, carefully numbered screenshots of texts, receipts with dates and hotel names circled, photographs of Scarlett and Daniel together, and the note, "We thought you should know before the award is given." The pause was like a held breath that never returns. The mentor's face flickered. He scanned the attachments on his phone at the podium. His hands trembled for a second. A murmur moved through the room like a wave. The mentor cleared his throat and, rather than continue with the prepared graciousness, he made a statement. "I'm being handed material right now that I was not aware of," he said, voice steady as a knife. "This organization stands for trust. If these allegations are true, I will recuse myself from tonight's ceremony until we have investigated." The MC tried to salvage the moment, but the nervous shuffling had begun. A reporter at the back of the room stood up, phone already recording. A table of partners leaned forward, eyes narrow. Daniel's face drained from another shade to a chalky gray. That was the first crack. It was subtle, and I could feel my entire body hum with it. But I wanted more than a recusal. I wanted the applause to die in his mouth and leave nothing but the cold. When the mentor left the stage, someone whispered in Daniel's ear. He walked off like a man whose map had been taken. Conferences do not pause for marital avalanches, but tonight everything paused. People noticed the absence of the usual performance of success. I could have left then. I could have been the gracious wronged wife who later filed for divorce. But the plan had been to expose the whole thing while it still had oxygen, to catch him while the room still believed him a good man. And oxygen in that room came from public trust. Remove the trust and his world would begin to crumble, moment by moment. The second move was quieter and required the kind of patience only desperation yields. I'd arranged for the vault of evidence to reach the right hands earlier that week. The firm's compliance officer, Daniel's mentor, and a private investigator who agreed to collect what I could not. The investigator, strict, quiet, and absolutely moral in his view of the world, provided witness statements from the desk clerk at the boutique hotel, times and dates. I had not fabricated anything. What I had done was bring the truth where it would matter. When the story broke, first as a rumor and then as a chain of documentary proof, phones buzzed. Emails were sent. Daniel's firm called an emergency meeting. I sat in the audience like a calm statue while, behind the stage, men in suits were shown the evidence on a laptop and faces went from confusion to comprehension. And then the public humiliation, because I wanted him to see the collapse, came. The firm released a statement the next morning acknowledging an internal inquiry against one of its senior staff members. The local press smelled a story. Twitter smelled blood. I watched the cascade from my living room, chest rock solid with resolve. I sat with my father while Sophie slept, and we watched the headlines change the map of our life. But the big staged move, the one I had obsessed over, came 3 days later. I'd arranged a piece that I'd rehearsed until my voice was a metronome. An open letter. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a blast of hatred. It was a measured, devastatingly precise recounting of what had happened. The affair, the lies, the receipts, the way Daniel had been lying to Sophie about bedtime stories while lying to me about his nights. Most of all, it centered on the human, the little girl who deserved better than grown men tossing their promises around like confetti. I posted the video at 9 in the morning, because nothing involving public figures moves faster than breakfast hours. Within an hour, my inbox flooded. I'd kept the camera close, my voice steady. I spoke to the camera like I would to a child. Small, honest, direct. People watched. They shared. Comments poured in, some supportive, some vitriolic. But the unexpected thing was that the viral attention didn't only harm Daniel's reputation, it amplified a pattern I'd suspected was bigger than him. One of the partners at his firm reached out to me privately, voice low on the phone. "You did the right thing," he said. "There are other questions we had. This might open more." Those words were a match and a trail, and they lit something I'd only half imagined. Daniel's betrayal wasn't just personal. It had been a wedge used to cover other breaches, conflicts of interest, misappropriations of funds, cozy deals that had been signed with a wink. Once one door opens, drafts blow through the rest. So I kept pushing. The third wave of my revenge was surgical but legal. I filed for emergency custody temporarily, on the grounds of instability while the investigations unfolded, and I retained a lawyer who had a talent for making complicated things look inevitable in court. The lawyer's questions were clinical, the legal filings conservative. I did not want to destroy Daniel's life in ways that could reflect badly on Sophie. No scorched earth fiscal maneuvers that would leave her childhood in rubble. What I wanted was to remove him from daily life long enough for the truth to settle, and to protect her. The court papers were served. The judge signed a temporary order, and for the first time in months, Sophie and I slept under the same roof without hearing a late-night car door slam. The law had been a tool, and I used it with the kind of restraint the wounded can only learn after lessons in consequences. By then, the firm was in free fall. The PR teams tried to stem the tide with carefully worded disclaimers and promises of full cooperation and ongoing reviews. But the clients worried. Contracts were paused. In the office where Daniel once strolled with swagger, whispers replaced laughter. And then the twist I hadn't expected, the one that would make the story even more complicated. Scarlett, who had been described in the press as a young associate and a possible client contact, did not react as a villain should. She posted something that made my chest feel like it had been punched. She'd posted a video of her own, a shaky, intimate confession. She spoke with a tremulous voice, eyes red. She revealed she was pregnant. She said she'd thought Daniel loved her. She sobbed in the video, "I don't know how to be anything but honest. I loved him. I thought he loved me." The internet, which had been pointing at Daniel, pivoted. People expressed sympathy for the young woman who'd been led astray. Men online wrote that such things happen. Commentators debated workplace power dynamics. Daniel's team used the narrative to try to humanize him. It was a masterclass in how public sympathy can redirect fury. For a heartbeat, I panicked. All my carefully timed exposure could be painted as cruelty toward a pregnant woman. The media cycle is a greedy beast. It finds heroes and villains and sometimes reassigns the masks overnight. That panic pushed me into the coldest corner of my revenge where theater and ethics meet. But I'd built a team. My father had called in a favor from a journalist he'd once helped. Melissa had dug deeper. The private investigator had continued to work quietly. We uncovered something that changed the angle entirely. Scarlett's social posts were honest, but they omitted a detail. Her messages to Daniel included lines that suggested she'd been angling for money. There were screenshots showing she'd demanded that he book certain hotels and reimburse expenses, and messages that suggested she'd known exactly how to be convenient. Not all of that meant she was villainous. People make mistakes and grief shapes confessions, but the pattern suggested this was not a naive fling. It suggested bargaining. It suggested leverage. When the story broke that Scarlett had been sending extortionate messages, "Pay me or I tell," some of the public sympathy faltered. The narrative grew jagged. Suddenly, there were shades, not absolutes. And then the most shocking thing of all happened. During the firm's internal probe, documents surfaced showing that Daniel had been moving money into an account in a different name. Not enough to disappear into thin air, but enough to show deliberate concealment. It wasn't embezzlement of client funds, that would be criminal, but it was unethical enough to get his license reviewed. The partners were not pleased. I wasn't naive about the pain I caused. I knew the cost of exposure. But truth has a brutal way of cutting through story. It refuses simple narratives. I watched both Daniel and Scarlett unravel under different lights, his hypocrisy, her desperation. And yet the final turn, the last piece of theater I'd set, was to be personal. I'd arranged a meeting. Not a trap exactly, but a confrontation where words were the only weapons. I asked Daniel to meet me at the lake house he'd secretly reserved, the one I knew about from the emails. He came, thinking maybe it was about reconciliation. He came, coiffed and arrogant, convinced he could charm his way out of anything. There, with the lake like a mirror behind him, I laid everything out. I showed him the hotel key card, the receipts, the screenshots. I told him about Sophie's birthday and the way his absence had felt like a knife. I could see him shrink. The confident man sounded small when confronted with his own handwriting, his own messages. Why? I asked, finally, voice clear. Why throw away years? Why gamble our daughter's life on nights you called mine? He tried to speak, then faltered. He looked like a man who'd been wandering without a map and now realized he'd been complicit in his own ruin. I wanted something new. It wasn't supposed to be like new, I said. New is a bad enough reason to ruin a child's sense of safety? He crumpled into apology after apology. Some were honest. Most were reflexive. He asked for forgiveness. He said he'd end it. He pleaded. He tried to bargain. But bargaining is a poor currency when trust is mortgaged. I gave him nothing. I told him plainly the consequences he had earned. He would face the firm's review. He would lose custody if he continued to put Sophie at risk. People would remember this. He had made those choices. There was no solace in his sorrow. When he left, shoulders hunched and voice thin, I watched him go and felt a purge of something like closure, but that was premature. Revenge is rarely a single blow. It is a long, slow scoring. The night he left, the firm suspended him pending review. Scarlett's pregnancy story complicated the headlines for a few days, but a deeper pattern had been exposed, and the firm could not ignore it. I didn't gloat. I didn't parade his ruin like a trophy. I told Sophie the truth in age-appropriate terms. Daddy made bad choices. He's getting help. It was heartbreak, but I controlled the narrative for my daughter. That was perhaps the best revenge of all. I protected my child's sense of safety and reclaimed the story of our life. There are still nights when I dream of eyes I once loved and wonder if the man I married was ever real. There are moments, too, when the shock of what happened lands anew, like a bruise you press to see if it still hurts. The final twist came when, out of nowhere, Daniel filed a defamation suit. It was petty and weak, an attempt to weaponize the court system against me. My lawyer smiled in a tired way and reminded me about how truth is the best defense. We prepared documents. We had patience. The world had seen enough. A man who betrayed his family is a poor plaintiff in a court of public sympathy. Meanwhile, in quiet corners of the firm, whispers of other wrongdoings were being investigated. Daniel's mentor had been named in internal memos as having had oversight responsibilities that were grossly overlooked. The ripple widened. I had wanted to make him regret, and I had in a way that counted. The public unmasking, the legal shield, the custody piece. These were the tools I'd chosen, measured, and relentless. The scar they left is there, and like any scar, it is both warning and map. As the firm's inquiries continued and Daniel's life narrowed into meetings with lawyers and nights of regret, a single envelope arrived at my house. Its return address was a name I hadn't heard in years. Inside was a single photograph of a woman I recognized, someone from Daniel's past. On the back, a line. Some secrets are older than affairs. I stared at that scrap of paper and felt the old world shift again. The truth I'd uncovered was only a part of a larger weave. Daniel's betrayal had been cruel, but it wasn't the only thread binding him to trouble. The game wasn't over. It had merely changed. And as the pages turned, I braced for the last act. The envelope sat on my desk for 3 days before I had the courage to open it again. The photo inside showed Daniel with a woman I didn't recognize. The handwriting on the back chilled me. Some secrets are older than affairs. For a while I obsessed. Was it another betrayal? Another hidden life? My mind spun in the familiar storm of suspicion. But then something strange happened. Instead of feeling consumed, I felt tired. Deeply tired. Revenge had sharpened me, but it had also drained me. That was the lesson life finally whispered. Sometimes knowing everything doesn't heal you. Sometimes the power lies in deciding what questions you don't need answered. Daniel's downfall unfolded slowly, like a building collapsing floor by floor. The firm suspended him indefinitely. His mentor cut ties to salvage his own reputation. His name was whispered in boardrooms as a cautionary tale. And the defamation suit he'd filed against me? It was dismissed in court, the judge remarking dryly that truth is a formidable defense. Scarlett, pregnant and frightened, disappeared from the spotlight. I never spoke to her directly, but through whispers, I learned she'd moved away. I carried no malice toward her in the end, only pity. She had been a piece in Daniel's game, just as I once was. The strangest moment came months later, when Daniel showed up at my door. His once perfect suit hung loose, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. "I've lost everything," he admitted. "I don't know how to start over." For the first time, I looked at him without love, without rage, only clarity. "You start," I said, "by realizing